So, why do some kids commit crimes? I mean, is it a calculated choice they make, or is there something deeper going on? Something in their biology, maybe their psychology, that's really beyond their control? Okay, let's dive into one of the most fundamental questions in all of criminal justice. To really get our heads around this, we have to start with a tragedy. This is a quote from a friend of Adam Lanza's mother. Lanza, of course, was the young man behind the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. You see, from a young age, he had a sensory processing disorder. For him, things like being touched, bright lights, and loud sounds were almost physically painful. And that just leads to this impossible question, right? How do we even begin to explain something so horrific? Was this a choice he consciously made? Or was he driven by these profound mental and physical conditions that for years just went untreated? This exact question has basically split criminologists into two big camps. And those two camps, well, they've come up with two very different theories to try and make sense of it all. It's really the classic debate, isn't it? Are delinquents born with certain traits that push them this way, or are they made by the choices they make and the situations they end up in? So here's how that divide looks. On one side, you have choice theory. The core idea is that delinquency is a rational act, that kids are actually weighing the pros and cons. But on the other side, you've got trait theory. This says no, delinquency is caused by abnormal traits, and the actions are impulsive, they're not calculated at all. All right, let's dig into choice theory first. The big idea here is free will. It basically suggests that a young person sees a chance to commit a crime, does a quick mental calculation, and decides that the potential reward, the money, the status, maybe just the thrill, is worth more than the risk of getting caught. And then they choose to act. So in this view, the young offender isn't just a victim of their environment. They're a logical decision maker, which of course makes you wonder, what kind of logic could possibly lead someone to break the law? Well, take the story of a 14-year-old runaway named Betty. Now, to you and me, her choice to live on the streets seems anything but rational, but in her mind, it was the most logical solution she had. She was escaping an abusive and chaotic home life. So for her, the stability of the streets actually outweighed the mess she was leaving behind. And Betty's story really highlights a few of the key factors that choice theorists are always pointing to. A young person might choose crime to solve a personal problem, like escaping abuse, or maybe it's to get money for something they want. Sometimes it's as simple as their parents not being around, which just creates an easy opportunity. And other times it's about getting revenge or building up a tough reputation. But, it's not all in their head. Choice theory also looks at how the world around us just kind of serves up opportunities for crime in our normal, everyday lives. And this is where a really interesting idea called routine activities theory comes in. It argues that crime isn't some crazy, extraordinary event. It's actually a pretty normal outcome of our daily routines, whenever three specific ingredients happen to come together at the same time. And here is that recipe. First, you need a motivated offender. Think an unemployed teenager who's bored and needs cash. Second, you need a suitable target, like a house with an unlocked door and a laptop sitting in plain view. And third, you need a lack of a capable guardian, so the parents are at work, the neighbors aren't home. When those three things line up, boom, the chance of a crime happening goes way, way up. Okay, so if delinquency is a choice that's based on risk and opportunity, then how do we stop it? Well, this gives us a few different strategies. We can try general deterrence, which is all about making kids afraid to get caught. Or specific deterrence, where you punish someone so harshly they won't dare do it again. We could also just incapacitate them by locking them up. Or we could try situational prevention, just making crime harder to pull off in the first place. But that brings us right back to where we started, doesn't it? Back to that haunting question, can a theory of rational choice really explain an act of senseless, profitless violence like the Sandy Hook massacre? It feels like, for some people, there has to be another force at work. And that's where we have to flip the coin and look at the other side of this whole debate. What if the root cause isn't a calculation at all? What if it's something inside the person, something buried in their biology and psychology? This is trait theory. It basically says, hold on, this isn't about rational thinking. It suggests that some kids are pushed towards delinquency because of abnormal traits, either physical or psychological. And the key difference here is that their actions are seen as impulsive or instinctual, not the result of some thought-out process. Now, this idea has been around for a long time, and honestly, it has a pretty controversial past. It all started back in the 1870s with a guy named Cesar Lombroso, who claimed you could spot criminals because they were evolutionary throwbacks with certain physical features. Yeah, those ideas were totally discredited. But in the late 20th century, a much more sophisticated version called biosocial theory came along. Today's biosocial theory is way more nuanced. It looks at the super complex stance between our biology and our environment. So scientists are studying everything from biochemical factors like diet and lead exposure to neurological issues like brain function and ADHD, and even genetic influences that might give someone a predisposition for certain behaviors.
And the reason this research feels so urgent becomes clear when you look at numbers like this. 16. That's the average number of mass shootings every year in the US since 2000. That is nearly 10 times the rate from the 1980s. This terrifying increase has made a lot of experts wonder if tragedies like Sandy Hook are linked to untreated psychological and biological conditions, especially at a time when access to mental health care has been declining.
This brings us deeper into the psychological part of trait theory, which is really trying to map out the messy, tangled inner world of the delinquent mind. One of the foundational ideas here comes from, you guessed it, Sigmund Freud. His psychodynamic theory suggests our personality is made of three parts: the impulsive I that just wants what it wants right now, the moral superego, which is our conscience, and the ego, which tries to play referee between the two. From this perspective, delinquency can happen when some conflict from childhood leaves a person with a super dominant I that just steamrolls everything else. And building right on top of that is something called attachment theory. It says that the bond a baby forms with their mother or main caregiver is absolutely critical. If that bond doesn't form properly, it can lead to a whole host of psychological problems later on, including a serious lack of empathy, which is a key trait found in a lot of people who commit antisocial acts. And the evidence here is, well, it's pretty staggering. Studies on incarcerated kids find shocking rates of mental disorders. In one study, over 90% of the girls and 88% of the boys had a psychiatric disorder. The connection between what's going on inside and the behavior we see on the outside is just, it's really hard to ignore. So after all that, choice theory on one side, trait theory on the other, where do most experts land today? Well, the debate isn't really choice versus trait anymore. The modern view is that it's a complex interaction. Delinquency grows out of this tangled web of factors, a combination of a person's biological and psychological makeup, and their family, their opportunities, and their entire social world. And that leaves us with the million-dollar question, doesn't it? The one our entire justice system has to grapple with. If a person's behavior is a mix of their own choices and their own biology, how do we as a society decide who to punish and who to treat? There's no simple answer.